Crime in Court. This is the 1996 Menendez brothers retrial. They were tried in 93 for the homicides of their parents, Kitty and Jose, and both they had two juries, one for each brother. Both juries came back hung, so it was a mistrial for them both. And the state decided to retry them about 3 years later, and this is the case that we have this time. The defense is on the stand. I'm sorry, the defense is in their case in chief, and Erik Menendez is on the stand. We are on the defense's case, part 35. And let's just get into it right away. Up first, there's going to be some arguments between the attorneys outside the presence of the jury. So, just letting you know that that's going to be about that about half of the stream today, and then the other half will be Erik Menendez. So, there's always, I do put the timestamps. So, if anybody needs to, go back to a certain timestamp or whatever, you got those down in the descriptions below. All right, so let's get started. And the court says, in the trial, the defendants, their lawyers, and the prosecutors are here. Are there any matters to take up before the jury comes in? Mr. Levin says, aye. Mr. Khan says, yes, Your Honor. Mr. Levin says, there is one additional exhibit that I'm trying to find that I'll show Mr. Khan as soon as we find it. But other than that, nothing from the defense. Court says, anything from the prosecution at this point? Mr. Khan says, yes, Your Honor. There are several exhibits which we will be objecting to. I'm not sure the purpose for which these exhibits are going to be offered. Again, we're going through, they're trying to admit all these exhibits, the defense is trying to admit these exhibits, trying to paint a picture of the brothers' childhood and, uh, corroborate some of the testimony that Erik is providing on the stand right now. But the state has been objecting to basically every question and every exhibit, just about. So it's kind of going that way. And the judge is kind of, I think he's being somewhat fair, but in the full grand scheme of things, I don't think he is, because he's not letting a lot of this abuse stuff come in or letting him go very far. He's even, like, in the last episode, he was during their arguments, they had another portion of arguments without the jury, and the judge was like, well, you're kind of taking a lot of time, and it's not that it's the time, it's just I don't want to confuse the jury. Like, he's whatever. He just doesn't want it coming in, because I think him and the prosecutors all were basically they were told they needed to guarantee a guilty verdict in this, in my opinion. After after the hung trial, and then also the loss of O.J. Simpson, who was in the O.J. Simpson trial took place in between the first Menendez brothers trial and the second Menendez brothers trial. They lost that. It's very, this is a political thing. They don't want to lose face, the DA's office. So you got to make sure that they secure some kind of a conviction, is, in my opinion, what I think happened here. And I think that's another reason why they are so adamant now, to this day, to keep the brothers in prison. Court says, anything from the prosecution? Yes, Your Honor, says Mr. Khan, will be objecting to several exhibits. I'm not sure the purpose for which these exhibits are going to be offered. Court says, are they going to be offered during the next stage of the examination of the witness? Whoa, went too fast. It like froze, and then I went way too fast. Mr. Levin says, some are. Some are, Your Honor, some aren't. Court says, let's focus on those that will be referred to in the upcoming session so that we don't get sidetracked on issues that won't arise until later. If you can, just pinpoint those. Mr. Levin says, perhaps the one you're holding and then this one. You're objecting to both of them? Mr. Khan says, yes. There are. Of the two identified by counsel, we would object to both of them. Apparently, there's a photograph which simply depicts a jar of Vaseline in the bedroom, and unless that particular jar of Vaseline has some significance, we would certainly object. It has great significance. Did you read the transcript from the first trial, buddy? Because you're prosecuting this case for the second time around and you can't figure out that this jar of Vaseline in the bedroom. Why can't I highlight? Things being weird right now. I can't highlight at all. Okay. Okay. I fixed it. I had to restart my Adobe for some reason. But I'm glad I did because that would have driven me nuts because I like to highlight as we read, as you know. So let's keep going. We know that the jar of Vaseline is very significant in this case because Erik has already testified to the fact that his father used it on Erik during their bedroom time. So we already know that that's quite significant. And for him to act like, oh, this jar of Vaseline, unless it has some particular significance, then we would certainly object. Get out of here. You absolutely should have read Erik Menendez's testimony from trial one and should absolutely know the significance of that jar of Vaseline. And if you're pretending that you don't, then you're just being incompetent and probably a little borderline corrupt. And even if it does have some significance, I would still object that under 352, a photo of a jar of Vaseline is not particularly probative and should be excluded. And then there's another photograph which simply depicts a road and somewhere there at the end of the road. I suppose that this is another location relating to where the defendants lived at some point in time. We already have photographs of all of those houses in which they lived, and we would object to that. I don't see the relevance of that. And there's a third photograph, which once again is the typical childhood photographs which the defendants are seeking to present in this trial. This one depicts the two defendants as children sitting on a boat in a lake. So we'll object to all three of these exhibits. The court says, okay, let's mark them so that we have a record here. 359 is a photo that with what has been described by Mr. Khan as a jar of Vaseline depicted in it. Mr. Khan says 359 will be the photo of the jar of Vaseline, 360 the photo of the road with someone at the end of the road, and 361 a photo of the defendants on a boat in a lake. The court says, and what is the relevance of the 360? That's the road, the photo of the road with someone at the end of the road. Mr. Levin says, Your Honor, which, I'm sorry, is that the boat or the cul-de-sac? Ms. Nahara says, cul-de-sac. Yes, Your Honor, the Exhibit 360 is a photograph which depicts the cul-de-sac where Erik Menendez, as a young child, was forced to ride his bicycle down a steep grade, which he would testify to was a requirement for him to keep the bicycle. That his father told him that he would have to be able to maintain his balance on the bicycle going around the cul-de-sac, and that unless he was able to maintain his balance, and even sometimes he was pushed down the cul-de-sac. And oh, what's going on with you? PDF? Oh, this is annoying. Okay, sorry about that. I don't know. Frustrating. Sorry. And we do have an eyewitness that's going to testify to that. Alan Anderson. Erik Menendez would not be allowed to keep the bicycle. On one occasion, one specific occasion, he fell down. Erik Menendez did. He injured his arm which was a gaping wound, which under normal circumstances would probably require stitches. But his parents did not seek medical attention, and the wound was just healed by itself, and Erik Menendez has a scar. The evidence was adduced at this last trial, and he showed the jury the scar and the photograph, which has been previously used in the trial and marked as Exhibit 155. The court says okay, and the other photograph, 161. Mr. Levin says 161, the rowboat on the lake, refers to an incident where Erik Menendez and Lyle Menendez were together on a boat in a lake, and Jose Menendez forced them to swim to shore. On one particular occasion, Erik Menendez, finding himself too weak to be able to make it to shore, began to drown. He was saved by his brother, which enraged Jose Menendez. The response was, "Do it all over again," and this photograph is of that lake. Court says, "Was that photograph taken at the time the incident occurred?" Mr. Levin says, "Unfortunately, a photographer did not witness the event. This was previously used, or it was used in the previous trial. It was Exhibit 170, but it's the only illustration of this particular lake that shows both Lyle and Erik Menendez on a boat on the lake, and not only would give the jury a graphic depiction of the size of the lake, which otherwise they would have to infer and conjure up an image in their own mind. This photograph clearly shows the size of the lake and accurately depicts the surrounding foliage and the area where Erik Menendez would say that he was at the time that he was drowning in the lake. And because he's on the lake with his brother, also tends to corroborate that there is a lake and he was on it. The court says, all right, as to the underlying incidents themselves, what is the people's position? Mr. Khan says, well, once again, we would object to testimony concerning these particular incidents unless the defendant is prepared to say that he took his father's life because he believed his father was going to take his life as a result of those incidents, or in some way ties these incidents into his motivation for taking his father's life. I would submit that the defendant should not be able to relate to the jury every negative experience he has ever had with his father. Essentially, what he's doing is once again trying to put his father on trial. You know what? Maybe Jose should have been on trial. Unfortunately, that didn't take place, and so here we are. I think that under Evidence Code Section 352, the court can find that because these incidents do not bear directly upon why the defendant feared that his father was going to take his life, that the court can exclude the incidents altogether. So I would submit that if the incidents are excluded, then the photographs, which do not even prove up the incidents, but only relate somehow tangentially to these, should also be excluded. The court says, all right, as far as Exhibit 359, that was subject of testimony in the first trial. I don't know if this particular photograph was the one used or another photograph that depicted this scene, but I recall there was such reference to that photograph, I believe, used as an exhibit. And it ties into the defendant's testimony. That photograph of the scene, the bedroom, is relevant to the defense and therefore would be admitted. Thank goodness. And he allowed that. But I have a feeling I'm not going to like his rulings on these other ones. As far as the photograph 360 and the incident to which it relates, what age is it that the defendant was at the time that incident occurred? Mr. Levin says, well, Your Honor, it was in his early childhood years. It was approximately when he was 7 or 8 years old. Court says, okay. The court finds that the incident, as outlined by the offer of proof, is remote in time. It's irrelevant to the issues in this trial. Baloney. The probative value of this evidence is substantially outweighed by its potential for prejudice and undue consumption of time, and the incident itself and the photograph to which it purportedly relates as an offer of proof are irrelevant and excludable under 352 of the Evidence Code. Therefore, that exhibit will not be permitted. So, which one was that? 360? Yeah, 360, which is the photo of the cul-de-sac, which we did hear testimony in the first trial. It also, I believe, I remember seeing this photo in the first trial too. Multiple photos, I think, of that cul-de-sac and how he was, and hearing testimony of how Erik was taught to ride his bike in cruel ways in that cul-de-sac. I remember that. So why that didn't get to come in, I have no idea. I think the lake photo may have come in the first trial too. Didn't he say it did? And now let's see what he says on that. So he's not admitting or allowing the cul-de-sac photo. The Vaseline photo is in. Mr. Levin says, Your Honor, there is another basis for the introduction of this evidence, and this goes to the relationship between Lyle Menendez and Erik Menendez that developed throughout the course of their lives. Lyle Menendez began as somewhat of a bully and abuser himself with respect to Erik Menendez, but later became his protector, and several key points or key incidents occurred during their lives together that were significant with respect to Erik Menendez's state of mind as it existed. The court says, well, first of all, the ruling I just made had to do with 360, which was the bicycle incident. Now you're going on to the boat. Mr. Levin says, well, I'll wait for the court's ruling before I perhaps. The court says, did you wish to argue the issue regarding the boat, the road, and the photograph of the road and the bicycle further? Mr. Levin says no. Court says, all right, there will be no reference to that during the examination based upon the court's ruling. So you can't even talk about the cul-de-sac and how he was very cruel, how Jose was very cruel in trying to get Erik to learn how to ride his bike. Wow. Court continues on saying, if there's any confusion in that ruling I just made related to Exhibit 360, which my notes indicate is the photograph of the road. Mr. Levin says, Your Honor, the point that we're trying to demonstrate, there is one matter with the bicycle incident, is that it constitutes substantial fear that Erik Menendez had of his father and the fact that he would follow his father's orders, and his father would use that kind of behavior in the training of Erik Menendez, that Erik Menendez had literally no choice in the matter, that he would have to perform in the manner that his father required, and even if he got hurt, his father and his mother would not even seek and obtain medical treatment for him. These are great points that uh, I think the judge is completely overlooking. The fact that he pushed him down the cul-de-sac is a separate basis for a finding of physical abuse, where Mr. Menendez, knowing that his young boy is not going to be able to make this bicycle trip, he makes him and pushes him down the cul-de-sac, and it tends to show the fear that Erik Menendez would have, not at the propulsion of himself going down the cul-de-sac, but at the hands of his father. And I think that that's important. And also the fact that he was injured and he did not receive any medical attention for the wound. Court says, all right, I can't, just an initial reaction, I can't imagine many of us who haven't been in similar situations as children, quite frankly. Does that mean it's not relevant evidence, sir? Just because everybody might have been in an abusive situation or had a mean interaction with their parent, does that mean that it's not relevant? Absolutely not. It's totally relevant in this case when you're claiming abuse. So it should come in. But he's saying because other people have had experiences like that, we're not going to let it in. Is that a legal finding? I don't think that's a real thing. He says, it's a very trivial event that you're describing here, not to Erik. It's not trivial to Erik, you jackass. It's a very trivial event that you're describing here and making it into a very dramatic event. That's my first reaction to it. But beyond that, you didn't take you didn't take to heart my remarks yesterday about cutting back on the sort of evidence. You said you're aware of it and you're cognizant of my remarks, but the important thing is to react and respond to it in a way that cuts back on this evidence rather than keep going at the same pace that you intended to go all along. Why is there so much pushback when the defense should have a good and robust direct examination of their defendant? You know what I mean? Like, why is there so much pushback on this? Mr. Levin says, Your Honor, I might point out that Erik Menendez has only been on the stand for 3 hours. The court says yes. Mr. Levin says his testimony probably comprises on direct examination so far maybe 120 pages. At the first trial, he testified. His testimony of these types of events, which caused him to have fear, comprised 10 days and is about 1,700 pages, about 1,000 pages on direct. Miss Abramson says, no. What was. Court says, first of all, a lot of that had nothing to do, a lot of that testimony had nothing to do with the events that you're talking about now. What I'm trying to do is get you to relevant testimony rather than the early events. The early events are relevant testimony. This just goes to show that either this judge knows absolutely nothing about abuse and its effects and didn't pay attention to the first trial and all of the experts in that trial, or he just is feigning ignorance. Those are the only two options because he, like I said in the last stream, he sat through the first trial and listened to all of those experts say PTSD, trauma, all this stuff that the brothers were experiencing and extreme fear and fear that built up during that entire week, which led up to the homicides. Every single expert was able to corroborate that. Anyone that had some kind of mental health expertise. Yet here we are just discounting it, you know? It's so sickening that this judge is like, whatever, I didn't hear any of that. Ms. Abramson says, can we have a moment, Your Honor? Abramson and Levin confer. Abramson says, thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Levin says, Your Honor, based on the court's rulings, based on what the court has already informed the defense regarding the limitations of the type of evidence that we wish to present, the only witness that we can use to present a picture of the brutality, the acts of violence, the state of mind that Erik Menendez had on August 20th is Erik Menendez. In fact, based on the court's rulings, we were put in a position and literally forced to call Erik Menendez to testify before we could call any family members, any teachers, coaches, any witnesses that have firsthand knowledge of specific incidents which corroborate the testimony of Erik Menendez. And so Erik Menendez is put in a position where he's trying to explain the brutality and the violence, a lifetime of brutality and violence that he suffered at the hands of his father. That includes SA, physical abuse, and psychological abuse. And when a father, not in an isolated incident of a lifetime of love and kindness, when a father in a lifetime of terroristic activities and brutality takes a child and throws him down a cul-de-sac and pushes him down on his bicycle, that is significant. That is a significant event in a child's life. And for him to just minimize that is gross. And that particular event is one which is mind numbing and one which creates an impression that lasts. It doesn't go away. And Erik Menendez's state of mind with respect to the type of brutality that was used upon him by his father, not just only in the bedroom, but the type of brutality that was used against him outside the bedroom in his everyday life is important for us to be able to explain. This is not going to be extremely time consuming. This particular incident will take 2 minutes, if that, for Mr. Menendez to explain and show the jury that he has a scar from it. Now, if the court's going to say that the prosecution cannot cross-examine Erik Menendez on his life, if their theory is that he was brutalized and that he was essayed and that he was terrorized and he was tortured, when I suppose that the defense would be in a position to where Erik Menendez would just say, I had a rotten life and go on from there. But Mr. Khan is not going to do that. The prosecution in this case is taking the position that everything in Erik Menendez's life is made up, that that he has fabricated a defense, that he is making up the abuse and brutality that he was subjected to. The purpose of the reconstruction of why we listen to all that testimony of Roger McCarthy to show that it's inconsistent with someone who had that kind of life. And their theories are very, very clear. We've heard tremendous testimony, amount of testimony post-crime spending with blow-ups of Rolex watches that the court allowed in that weren't even the Rolex watches that they purchased. In fact, not even the type of Rolex watch that they purchased. And here we have the very lake and the very cul-de-sac and the very incident. And I think that it's incumbent upon this court to allow Erik Menendez to fully explain those incidents that he has proof occurred, physical proof on his arm, physical proof by photographs, corroborating proof from witnesses that will come in and testify when Mr. Khan cross examines Erik Menendez and leaves an inference in front of this jury that all that evidence of his life is being conjured up and made up. This is a great argument. I don't know if it's going to work, but we'll see. And this goes to the very heart of this case. The court says, well, that's part of the defect in your argument, and you argue long and you argue hard and you argue effectively for admission of evidence in a case where the allegation was child abuse. That's not the allegation here. This is a different case and a different charge, and the only relevance of this evidence is as it relates to the mental state of the defendant at the time that he took his parents' lives. Do you think that being abused as a child would not affect you as an adult? Is this judge even serious right now? That it wouldn't affect his mental state of mind, his state of mind later in life as a child when he has all these horrible experiences from his father? This judge he just doesn't want it to come in. And he's doing his darndest to come up with legal arguments to keep it out. And it's only corroborative of his testimony of his mental state at the time and supportive of any expert opinion you might offer. And it's subject to limitations because it's remote in time and lacking in probative value. And the rulings would be different if, in fact, this was a trial where you were the prosecutor and you were trying to prove child abuse and the roles were reversed. This is not that trial. Mr. Levin says, but Your Honor, I think we tend to lose sight that the incident occurred in 1989. It occurred 6 years ago. It's remote from today. Erik Menendez is 25 years old. He's been in jail for 6 years. When a person is 18 years old, events that happen when you're 11, 12, 13, 15 are not remote. And this was not a full-grown, mature man when he went to jail. This was a young man right out of high school, days out of high school, and these events were not remote in time with relationship to when August the 20th, 1989 occurred. And I hope that we are not in the position when we consider remoteness of looking at its remoteness in time in 1995. And I think that because of the events, because there's been a trial, because there's been lengthy delays, we tend to get mired up in the issue of remoteness. 18 years old is not that far from 12, 13, 15. The court says, no, I'm quite aware of the time frame that's at issue here, and I'm quite satisfied that the incident relating to the bicycle is remote in time and lacking in probative value, and both under Section 350 and 352 of the Evidence Code, the court sustains the prosecution's objection. I agree that the defendant has not been on the witness stand a long time, but we're talking about more than just his time on the witness stand. We're talking about the potential of confusion of issues in this case, and again, confusing what I just referred to of a trial of homicide trial versus a trial of child abuse. They are different trials. And this is the trial involving a homicide, and that is the issue that we have to focus on. And the references to these early incidents only have relevance as to the mental state of the defendant at the time he took the lives of his parents. And that's how it has to be analyzed, not on a lifetime of experiences and everything that because of the negative nature and his relationship with his father that the defense seeks to introduce doesn't become admissible just because it is something the doctors and psychologists who examine the defendant think it's important or because counsel think it's important. But isn't that the point of a trial? If counsel and experts think something is relevant and important to this case, that it should come in? What is this judge even rambling on about? It has to have a basis of admissibility on the trial in this trial on the grounds of relevance, and this is not relevant. Mr. Levin says, I think to a casual observer conjuring up the image of a young boy sitting on a bicycle where a father pushes him down a cul-de-sac may not seem to be so terrible. But when it's explained from the mind of a young Erik Menendez, where his entire life was one where he was subjected to random acts of violence, to where he formed the opinion day by day, incident by incident, that he was going to die and that his father was going to kill him, this is a significant event at any early childhood time of his life, which tends to form a permanent impression that doesn't go away, that he feared death and that he felt the taste of death. He felt that he was going to die. He knew he couldn't make it down the cul-de-sac and didn't, and indeed didn't. And when he went down and he injured himself and he was bleeding, he didn't know what was going to happen. He knew he didn't go see a doctor. But the point is that he felt that he was going to die. The court says, okay, I've ruled. I've heard your argument. Let's move on to the boat incident. You've already made some remarks about that. Anything further you wanted to add to it? Are you kidding me with this judge? How did that not get more of a look at it, like in the appeals process? I'm sure something like this would have been appealed and, or, part of an appeal in their after this trial and after the conviction. I just wonder why we're okay with judges just going, nope, it's not relevant because I say it's not, even though it has everything to do with his state of mind and we know that your childhood, your upbringings, your experiences shape who you are later on in life and your characteristics and your traits. And fear is one of those things, right? Anxiety, fear, the depression, those can come from these kinds of incidents. Anyways, let's move on. So he says, let's move on to the boat incident. Did you want anything further you wanted to add to that? Mr. Levin says, yes, Your Honor. This incident is very important. They all are, but the incident is very significant with respect to demonstrating that which it purports, that Jose Menendez was a cruel man who would tolerate no sign of weakness from his sons. And when he saw Erik Menendez unable physically to make it to shore and was drowning, his response was to make him do it all over again. However, or moreover, we have Lyle Menendez stepping in the role of protector and making the conscious effort to save Erik Menendez's life from the lake. And that causes Erik Menendez to realize that his brother is his protector, that his brother is the kind of person that he could go to, and indeed he does when he goes to him. When he goes to him Tuesday on August the 15th and tells Lyle Menendez. Court says, okay, let me stop you there. I find that incident is marginally relevant, that boat incident, I'll permit it. However, the photograph is not a depiction of the incident as it occurred and is not relevant. Seriously? Therefore, under 352 of the Evidence Code and 350, the photograph 361 will not be permitted to be used. Mr. Levin says, Your Honor, that photograph is of the very lake where the incident took place, and how this court can allow the prosecutor to admit Jeeps that aren't even of the type of color or year, Rolex watches that aren't even the type that were purchased, and then say that this photograph is not an accurate depiction of that which it purports to be. I can't understand that. And that photograph is the only way that Erik Menendez can demonstrate to the jury that this was not just a small little pool of water where he could have stood up in the water, that boats go in onto the water, that it's difficult to make it across, and this photograph depicts all that. Without it, Erik Menendez can testify to it, but without being allowed to call live witnesses to corroborate him, without being able to corroborate his testimony with photographic evidence, Erik Menendez alone must make his case, and the prosecution certainly is going to cross-examine him on the truth and veracity of everything he says. This photograph is relevant. The court says, I'm not dealing with what the prosecution might do on cross-examination because I haven't heard it yet. At this point, the photograph doesn't depict anything in issue in this case. It's not relevant, and therefore the objection is sustained to that. Wow. Mr. Lemon says, we're ready, Your Honor. Court says, as far as other incidents and other exhibits, I would ask that you not just keep in mind the court's remarks, but utilize them in analyzing when deciding what other evidence you intend to offer before you get on to the incidents at issue in this case. Mr. Lemon says, I am aware of the court's arbitrary line of which it draws with respect to presenting Mr. Menendez's life. I love that he threw that in there. It's arbitrary. You're just making it up as you go along, sir. I have tried to select incidents that I feel are relevant and important to his defense in a capital case where both Lyle and Erik Menendez are on trial for their lives, and Erik Menendez is trying to explain to the jury what his state of mind was, but I cannot, in my mind, clearly demark where it is that the court is saying that he can and cannot testify. I mean, I have tried, and I'll continue to try, but I don't know what the court is saying with respect to either a time, let's get on with it, or this is where we're cutting it off. I don't see the insignificance of these incidents, and for that, I apologize. He's like, I see these as very significant, relevant factors that need to come in to this trial for us to get our defense in. And the court apparently sees it another way. You're giving us these random rulings, and I can't really follow. I'm trying my best, Your Honor. Court says, all right, and I hope you apologize for describing the court as being arbitrary. Wow, he didn't like that, did he? Mr. Levin says, well, Your Honor, if the court took it that way, I take the court's line that it drew as being arbitrary. I don't take the court as arbitrary. I have a great respect for you and great respect for this court. But what I'm referring to is that I don't know clearly in my mind where the court has drawn the line upon which I cross to find that incidents are insignificant versus incidents which the court finds are relevant to Mr. Menendez's state of mind. We have been discussing all these incidents with experts who find great relevance in these incidents, who are prepared to come to court and testify not only to the knowledge of the incidents, but to the meaning of them and explain how they impacted Erik Menendez's life. And therefore, I cannot, in attempting to defend Erik Menendez, find within myself that which I feel the court is saying. It's not clear to me. Court says, well, as I said, you better focus on the issue in the case, which is his mental state at the time of the homicides of his parents, and spend less time on these other incidents that are remote in time. Mr. Levin says, that's what I'm saying. I suppose that when the court feels it's appropriate, it will let me know with speedy dispatch, but it's not clear to me. Court says, okay, as I said before this testimony began, I wasn't going to make any rulings. Although the prosecution asked the court to foreclose all of the evidence that you're now offering, I wasn't going to make any rulings upon it until I heard the questions and the nature of the inquiry, and I think that's the appropriate way to proceed. If the court adopted the prosecution's analysis and their position, none of this evidence would be received whatsoever. Is that like a threat or something? I don't know. Are you being a nice guy? Like what? What, you want a cookie? And the court has not taken that position. The court feels that some of this evidence is relevant and relevant only on the issue of the defendant's mental state at the time he took his parents' lives. And that is where the court is focused, and the court expects counsel to focus likewise in that area. I'll try, Your Honor. All right, let's get the jury out, please. Holy heated conversation, Batman. That was crazy. This is I forgot to say this is the beginning of December 8th, 1995, and that was that's the morning. It just started out with a bang. So, yeah, so now we're going to get the jury in, and Erik's going to come back on the stand, and with that we'll get to his direct examination continued. But what was I going to say? So we're trying to as we're reading through this transcript, we already watched trial one. Now we're kind of comparing the two because as we've all been told, there's a lot of stuff about the essay that or their childhood that didn't come in. So this is a difference here that we're seeing in this trial where the state is fighting everything, basically every question that's coming in direct examination, and they're fighting every exhibit. They don't want this stuff coming in. They don't want it showing a pattern of abuse by Kitty and Jose. And that's really what this is, what it comes down to, because the evidence that they're trying to portray is a pattern of abuse. And so all of this is the state really trying to say, oh no, Jose and Kitty were just lovely parents and don't look at all the horrific things that they did to their own children. So that's my take on this. Because in the first trial, they weren't prepared. The state was not prepared for the defense of child abuse and SA and all of that. They weren't prepared to rebut that, I guess would be the right words. They didn't have experts, nobody to say, no, this didn't happen. Just the prosecutors in their closing statement saying, oh no, they're lying about everything. But we know that that's not true. All right, so let us get started now. The court is, jury is back, says the court. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and we're ready to resume with the testimony of the defendant, Erik Menendez. Would you get back on the witness stand, please? And he does. He's reminded that he's still under oath. You may continue the direct examination. The witness says, yes, sir. Direct examination continued. Mr. Levin is still doing the questioning for the defense, for Erik's defense. Mr. Menendez, are you taking any medication for depression? Yes. What is it that you're taking? I'm not sure which one of them is for what. Either Pamelor or I think it's Pamelor. One of the medications that you mentioned the first day of your testimony is for depression? Yes. And you mentioned that you saw Dr. Vickery. Have you also seen a Los Angeles County Jail Dr. Koonsman? Dr. Koonsman, yes. And has he likewise prescribed you medication? Yes. I want to move forward a little bit. On Sunday, August the 13th, 1989, how old were you? 18. And that's just when you got out of high school, correct? Yes. And this was 1 week before the death of your parents, correct? Yes. And that day, did something happen between you and your father that literally shattered your life? Yes. What was that? He told me that I would have to be living at home several nights a week while I was in college and that my bedroom would be preserved and that I would be sleeping there. How did you interpret his remarks? That the sex between him and me would continue on into college. Did the sex between you and your father continue after your 18th birthday? Yes. When was the last time that your father had sex with you before the death of your parents? August 9th or 10th of 1989? Yes. So within weeks, within 10, 11 days of the homicides. So approximately 10 or 11 days before their death. Right. And your father, and we'll get into the specifics of the conversation you had with him at a later time, but what impact did that conversation have on you? I guess I reached a point where I no longer cared about living, no longer cared about going on, and it seemed like my life was folding out in front of me. Did you have some hope and some dream that would occur after you graduated high school? I had a dream of going away to college and getting away from my father. Where did you want to go to college? In August, I thought I was going to go to UCLA. Where did you want to go? Brown University. Where's Brown? In Rhode Island. Were you somewhat optimistic that you would be able to get away? Yeah. After your 18th birthday and after you graduated high school? Yes. On Tuesday, August the 15th, just 5 days before the death of your parents, did you tell someone that you had been molested for 12 years from the time that you were 6 to the time that you were 18 by your father? Yes. Who did you tell? Lyle. Why did you tell Lyle Menendez at this particular time? I suppose because Lyle had always been there for him, for me. Yeah, that's weird. Okay. I suppose because Lyle had always been there for me and protected me in my life. I don't know why there's a him right there. And I reached a point where I wasn't going to make it, and it just seemed to be the last step I could take. What was your hope that Lyle Menendez would do? What was your hope that Lyle Menendez would do when you told him? That's a weird way to word that. That he would somehow find a way to end it for me. And when you say find a way to end it, what did you have in mind? Somehow talk to my dad anyway, and what was happening between dad and I, it could not continue. Did Lyle Menendez have a different relationship with respect to communication with your father than you had? Very different. And how would you describe that relationship with Lyle Menendez and your father? My father and I didn't really have a communication, and Lyle, throughout my life and growing up, was the firstborn and was the one that my dad primarily focused his attention and training on in sports and grooming for business. And Lyle understood my dad better in many ways, and he was just my older brother at the time. Did you feel that Lyle Menendez had greater strength than you? Yes. And what kind of strength comes to mind? Almost in every sense. He was smarter, physically stronger. He was much more brave than I was. Have you seen Lyle Menendez interact with your father before? Throughout my life. Was there a common way, a customary way, where Lyle Menendez would communicate with your father in your presence? Yes. And did this occur at the dinner table? Yes. Could you explain typically what you would see? My father would come home and the whole family would have dinner together, and and in the dinner my dad wanted to know what happened from the moment Lyle woke up to the moment he went to sleep and all the moments in between, and they would go through a question and answer type of drill in which Lyle would tell him what he did when he first woke up in the morning, what stretches and exercises he did. Normally it was my father who took us to play tennis at 5 in the morning, so he knew what happened in the tennis court, but Lyle would explain what happened at school. And if my father wanted to test Lyle and see if he really understood what he was talking about, he would have Lyle get up from the dinner table and explain either the strokes he was using to play tennis or the stretching exercises he would do and the drilling that would go on. Now, was that just a typical strike that? Was this just a family dinner where all the members were conversing? No. Who would be present at a dinner in the Menendez household where your father and Lyle Menendez would be communicating in the manner you just described? My father, myself, Lyle, my mother. And would your mother participate in the conversation? In a way. In what way? As Lyle would tell the story of his day, my mother would either shake her head or nod in agreement or in disagreement with little things that Lyle was saying, in which case my dad would explode and grab Lyle and bump his head and say, "Wrong, that's not what you're supposed to be doing," or "You're lying." And so it was more of a silent participation in which she said very few words, but allowed her abusive husband to strike and abuse their child together. She's complicit. I mean, do you guys need any more evidence that she is? She's been complicit in all of this abuse. And in when I first started watching the trial, I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt, saying, she's an abused spouse, so she's acting in a certain way. No, she's definitely complicit. She's allowing, just by nodding her head or shaking her head or whatever, disagreeing with Lyle, she's getting Lyle beat physically. So, and has no problem with that, I guess. So your father would ask Lyle to recount his day, and Lyle Menendez would begin counting his day. Your mother would affirm it or deny it in some way. Yes. And would you be allowed to participate in the conversation? I didn't really want to participate in the conversation. I didn't really want to be spoken to or ask questions. I mean, if my father reacted in the ways he did to Lyle, he would do no less to me. And so I didn't really want to be involved. So I would answer questions if asked. What kind of signal would your mother make to your father that would cause him to react in the manner you just described? She would normally, when my mother was not just sitting at the table, she would be sitting and eating or getting up and going to the kitchen, which was right next door and was right next to the dinner table. And she would either nod from the kitchen or shake her head, and my father would be continually looking over to her throughout the dinner. And would the reaction of Jose Menendez to your brother Lyle Menendez, if he was reacting in a violent way, occur at the dinner table? Yes. What is it that he would do to Lyle Menendez? He would either grab him and pull him closer or yell and say, "Wrong, that's not how you do it." Sometimes he would ruffle his hair and say, "Good boy." Like a dog, if my brother did too many things wrong in the day or my father disapproved to a larger extent, there were times when he would take Lyle and throw him outside and close the sliding glass door, and he would wait outside. This is different not hearing it from Lyle. This is another thing because Lyle can't testify in this trial because he was caught asking people to lie for him in prison, asking his girlfriend and uh, Brian as Laminia, asking them to lie for him about the, experiencing violence from their father. So, therefore, he can't testify this trial. But that really hinders the defense in that you're not hearing it in such a sympathetic way coming from Lyle himself talking about the things that Jose did to Lyle specifically. We have to get it in through Erik because Erik witnessed it. And so maybe not all of it's going to be able to come in because maybe Lyle didn't, maybe, things happened when Lyle was alone with Jose and when Erik wasn't there. So it really hinders the defense in this way. How do you feel about witnessing this? Very used to it. Frightened at first, and then you learn not to participate and learn to sort of be invisible. Was it funny? No, it was not funny. Was it scary? Yes. How did Lyle Menendez react? Lyle was a lot more stone-faced than I was. Younger, I remember him crying and then he learned over the years not to. And so he wouldn't give too much of an expression. He just would try to keep up with what was happening. And so his greatest fear was. Mr. Khan says objection calls for speculation as to what the co-defendant's fear was. The court says sustained at that point where the witness said his greatest fear, that statement and anything thereafter is stricken. Mr. Levin says, were there times, Mr. Menendez, where you had personal knowledge of what Lyle Menendez did during the day that formed the basis of the conversation he was relating to your father? I played tennis with him in the morning with my father from 5 or 5:30 in the morning to 6:30 or 7. At school, at Princeton Day School, we went to school together, but he was 3 grades more up than I was. So I didn't see him very often, but afterwards, my mother would pick us up and go to, excuse me, would pick us up and go to sports, and I'd be with him all the time in the car and then out on the tennis court, and he was the next tennis court over, sometimes on my court. Were there times, Mr. Menendez, where you had personal knowledge that that which Lyle Menendez was telling your father was the truth, but your mother disagreed with it? Objection irrelevant. Overruled. Yes. So Kitty would flat out lie just to get Lyle in trouble from with his father. That's horrific. What kind of mother does that? Obviously, there wasn't a motherly bone in Kitty's body. How did that make you feel with respect to how you viewed your mother? Well, I don't quite know how to answer the question. The view of my mother formed from many other ways in terms of how to answer questions in front of my dad, in front of her, whether she would agree with what had happened during the day or say different things that happened, depended a lot more on other circumstances that were going on at the time. Are you saying that your mother, in your state of mind, would do things to get Lyle Menendez in trouble with your father on purpose? Normally, because somebody was going to get hurt in the family, and that was the reason, I guess. Yes. So let him take it out on Lyle, so he didn't take it out on her, I guess. I want you to explain that. What do you mean somebody was going to get hurt? There was a time when we were coming home from the tennis club, and my father was getting home around 8, and there was a flat tire on the way home. It was about an hour drive home, and my mother had to fix the flat tire, and we didn't get home till about 9. And my mother didn't want to say that there was a flat tire, to no fault of her own, but she was afraid that Dad would say, "You should have checked the tire, or the tire should have had more air in it." So, like it's her fault that she gets flat. So she said that Lyle was goofing off at the tennis club and not at the car on time when they were prepared to leave, and as a result, it would be Lyle that got hurt instead of Mom. Wow. How? And you knew this wasn't true, is that correct? Yes. What your mother said. Did Lyle Menendez say anything to Jose Menendez that what your mother had told him was not true? Objection, irrelevant, sustained. How did Lyle Menendez react when his father would hit him or shake him at the dinner table during these conversations? He had an incredible ability to adapt to what my father wanted to hear, so I think that he would want us all to keep the emotion inside, and he was able to switch what he was saying in mid sentence from the look on my dad's face and other expressions, basically just responded in the way that my dad would want to after that. It's a clear sign of a child who grows up in a violent, abusive situation where everything that they say and do, they have to be on eggshells because any little thing can set off their abuser. And you become very hyper vigilant, which means you become aware of your surroundings. You're very, like, all of your awareness, your senses, all of it is like heightened, because it helps you adapt. It helps you survive in that situation when you're about to be yelled at. You're like, no, 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 that's not what I meant. I meant this. And your brain, like, can adjust and shift and adapt very quickly in those situations for some people. I mean, it didn't, I don't know if it happened as easily for Eric, but for Lyle, he was able to adapt, um, like that when, dad he might be sensing some disappointment or disagreement from his father, then he can shift gears really quickly, and then you, like, um, extinguish the situation. You don't want to light fire on the the tiny little spark that is Jose. It's like once you start doing anything that could set him off, then you want to try to minimize that. Was he brave? Sometimes he was, yes. Was his emotions different than the way you handled these things? Objection, irrelevant. Sustained. Could you tell us from just the look on your father's face what was going to happen? Often. What kind of looks would your father make that would cause you to feel that something was going to happen? Well, it was the look and the things he did along with the look in which he would in which you could figure out that he what was going to happen. His stare and the way his face frowned or his lips moved. Different expressions he would give, other things he would do. See, that's that hypervigilance you could see as a child of abuse of that individual, you're going to notice the little lip movement or some kind of, the eyebrow, whatever it is. You're going to notice those little things that are the signifiers that that person is starting to get upset. So you realize it early before, or hopefully before they blow up and yell at you. Now, Lyle Menendez was not always your protector, was he? He didn't always protect me, no. And during your early childhood, you didn't like Lyle Menendez very much, did you? After what had happened when I was 5 with Lyle, I was very leery of him. Did your father ever use Lyle Menendez as an instrument to hurt you? Well, my father wanted to teach my brother different ways to fight, different joints, and where the pressure points on a body were, and so I was sort of the guinea pig in which Lyle would practice on me. And when you say Lyle would practice, would he hurt you? Yes. Would you cry in pain? Sometimes. Would you would he stop when you cried in pain? When he got older, yes. Was Jose Menendez encouraging Lyle to hurt you? The more I cried, the less my father liked me, and so he wouldn't tell Lyle to stop. How did that make you feel? I don't know. Did things later develop in your life where your father and your mother did certain things to try to get you not to cry so much? Objection, irrelevant. Sustained. Did your father ever tell you how to do anything to Lyle, like hit him or punch him? Yes. What did he tell you? At one point, I I was having a yelling match with Lyle or I complained to Dad that Lyle was hurting me too much, and he told me that when we get in the fights, just to grab the biggest object I could pick up at the time and smash Lyle in the face. And did you do it? Tried one time. And what happened? I missed. And I guess the punishment got a little worse at that time for that incident. What was your dad's reaction? He laughed. Were you hurt? Yes. Was there a time when things began to change where Lyle Menendez in your mind became protective of you? Objection, irrelevant. The court says, does this have to do with a specific incident that we've discussed? Mr. Levin says, well, yes, it does. Overruled, you can answer the question. The witness says, yes. Could I have a moment, Your Honor? Was there a specific incident with respect to a lake that is significant in your mind where you felt Lyle Menendez was your protector? It was the first time that he ever saved my life. Lyle generally protected me from my mom's rages or any outbursts that would happen at the house earlier in time, but this was the first time that he saved my life. So it's interesting that Lyle protected him from Kitty's rages. Because as we know, Lyle later on, closer in time to the homicides, Lyle was pretty much the object of Kitty's rage. Um, so maybe it just became Lyle interjected himself so Erik didn't get the brunt of it when they were little, and then unfortunately Lyle got the worst of it. I don't know, but that's interesting to me that Lyle protected Erik from Kitty's outrages. Um, And could you relate that particular incident to the jury? When my father took my brother and I out on the lake, we lived on a large lake that had a narrow beginning and then went into a wide circle. And my brother and myself and my father were out on a very small sunfish sailboat. And he would sail out to the middle of the lake. And on the way, my father would tell stories about the snapping turtles in the lake and the little ones and the big ones. And when we got to the lake, my father wanted us to swim to shore, practice being able to swim the distance. It was a far distance, and so he ordered my brother out of the boat, and my brother was reluctant. But since my dad ordered him out of the boat, he went out of the boat and began to cry. I began to cry. I was afraid to go out of the boat. So my father pushed me out of the boat and sailed on. And Lyle was a faster swimmer and 3 years older and further ahead and was closer to shore. And so I started swimming to shore. And about halfway halfway there, 3/4 of the way there, I was beginning to panic and I was beginning to take in water and swallow water, and I wasn't going to make it. I was going down. And I would flap my arms and yell for help, and my brother, who was on the shore, swam back into the lake and grabbed me and pulled me towards the shore. He saved your life? Yes. Now, do you have a vision in your mind of what that lake looks like? Yes. Was this just a small little pond or a body of water? No, it was a large lake that a lot of houses were on that had a dam at the end of it in which the water would flow over, and it went off into several directions, sort of a big pool with small little lakes or two small lakes going off it. Was it just like a round lake? Strike that. How wide would you say it was across? I remember it being huge, half a mile. Was it the kind of shallow little pond where you can at any time stand up in it? No. If you tried, would the water be over your head? I'm sure the depth was 30, 40 feet. What kind of boats go on the lake? Big and small. Catamarans, sailboats. And where were you in relationship to the shore when your father told you to go swim to shore? 100 feet, 150 feet offshore. And he wanted you not to swim back to where you had come from, but to the other side? He dropped us off in the middle of the lake in the center so that we had no choice but to swim to one of the shores, and he wanted me to swim to shore. And you believe that there were snapping turtles in the water? There were snapping turtles. The stories were true that he was telling. So this is got kind of a muddy bottom. It's a real lake. Yes. What happened after Lyle Menendez pulled you to shore? My father came over and was in a rage that my brother had saved me when my father felt I would have made it. And my brother said I wasn't going to make it, and he grabbed Lyle, put him back on the boat, put me back on the boat, and sailed out to shore, sailed out from shore again to the middle of the lake. Were you crying? I don't remember. I was crying when I was swimming. I don't remember if I was crying at that time. Do you know what was going to happen when your father put you back in the boat? I had a bad feeling. And what happened? He made Lyle swim to one shore, and when Lyle was about halfway there, he ordered me to swim to the opposite shore. Made Lyle swim to the other shore that you had to swim to? Yes. And that was so he couldn't help you? Yes. Was this typical of your father's behavior with respect to you and Lyle Menendez during your childhood and adolescent years? Objection vague and irrelevant. Sustained on the grounds of being vague. Were there other incidents that you could describe where similar types of events occurred between your father and Lyle Menendez and yourself? What part of the incidents where Lyle saved me? Yes. Other incidents where uh, my father put us out on the lake? where Lyle Menendez intervened and did something that you interpreted as being your protector. Objection, irrelevant, overruled. Yes. And what comes to mind? Several different things, but I guess in relation to the lake, there was a time we had a canoe and a sailboat, and we had to make sure that they were tied up to a tree because the current would drag the boats away. Different people had a dock. We didn't. And one day, I guess it was in the summer, I was out in the canoe and I came back and it was a windy day, and I think there was a storm coming. Anyway, I tied up the canoe and I didn't tie it up well enough, and the canoe started. By the time I saw it again, it was at the end of the lake. What happened? I went to my brother and I was crying and I was panicking and I was saying, I gotta get the canoe. And he said, Dad's going to be home any second. And I started to shake because I knew what was going to happen. What was going to happen? Objection calls for speculation. Rephrase the question. In your mind, what was going to happen? I was going to get beaten or whipped. Why would you possibly believe that your father would beat or whip you for that? It's just what my dad did. Did when? Throughout my life. Go ahead. And so I'm sort of out by the sunfish thinking of some type of reason I can give to him of why I didn't tie the boat well enough. And I went back up to into the boat, up into the house, and at some point my brother had a conversation with my dad and had told my dad that he was the one that didn't tie up the canoe and that the canoe had drifted down because it was his fault. And I remember being in my room and hearing the sound of the belt and just feeling a great sense of relief and pain, and I guess happiness because I was beginning to realize that Lyle really loved me. Oh, it breaks my heart that he's like, finally I know, finally I know love. Finally, someone did something nice for me. It's awful. Did you ask Lyle Menendez to take the blame for you? No. Did you ask Lyle Menendez to take a beating for you? No. You mentioned a belt. Did your father use a belt to beat you or hit you? Yes. Where did he keep the belt? Hanging in my closet. Whose belt was it? His belt. And were you told anything with respect to his belt? Not to move it or touch it. Were there other incidents where Lyle Menendez had protected you from a beating that you believed you were going to get from your father? Yes, there was a time when I was spray painting my bicycle and I didn't realize that my bike was a little bit too close to the car. Oh, and I'd gotten spray paint on the car and there was sort of an outline of the bike or spray paint on the car. And I went to lie. That sucks, man. And that's like just a kid mistake, you don't know until you do it. And I went to Lyle and I said, what am I going to do? I've got to clean this off. And I had already tried some sort of brush that wiped away the paint of the car along with the spray paint and made a big mark on the car. The paint had come off, and Lyle had told Dad that he was the one that did that when Dad finally got home. Did you fear your mother on August the 20th, 1989? Yes. Had she done things throughout your life that caused you to believe that she could take your life? Yes. Had she done things throughout your life that caused you to fear her? Yes. Had things happened where Lyle Menendez protected you from things that your mother did that scared you? Yes. What kind of things did your mother do that scared you? To scare me or that scared me? That scared you. She would drink a lot and alcohol? Yes. It was a scary situation in the house when Mom was drinking because she would get angry, or even when she wasn't drinking, she would go into a rage about something or other. And if you were in front of her, you could get hit. And if that was going to happen to me, Lyle many, many times stepped in front of me so that my mom hit him instead, and other things like that. Did your mother ever leave you alone in shopping malls? Objection, irrelevant. sustained. That's absolutely relevant. It's negligent parenting. I want to go back for a moment to why you believed, and you know what else is her chaotic or erratic driving when she would have the brothers in the car. She would drive excessive amounts of speed. She would disregard, you know, traffic rules of the road and things like that. She was not a good driver or just felt that she owned the road. I'm not really sure. But either way, she was not a good driver. Mr. Levin says, I want to go back for a moment to why you believed that Lyle Menendez would talk to your father and communicate with him better than you. And, Your Honor, could we take a recess at this time? I just need to do something first. The court says, all right, we'll take our recess and we'll resume in 10 minutes to the hour. Don't discuss anything amongst yourselves or with anyone else about this case. Don't form any final opinions about it, and we'll resume at 10 minutes to the jury exits the courtroom. Court says, all right. Again, if you're going to be using any additional exhibits that we haven't talked about, if you can show those to the prosecution so that we can have some hearing about 10 minutes before we have the jury back. So about 20 minutes too. Mr. Levin says, all right. The court says you can step down. And that's where we're going to break for today. So thank you guys so much for watching, and we will continue Erik Menendez's testimony in tomorrow's episode. So please hit that like button if you haven't done so already, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Thanks again. Bye now.